Good evening. I would like to call to order the regular meeting of the Planning Commission for Tuesday, April 25th, 2023. Welcome, everybody. Ms. Ellis, will you please do a roll call?
Cater Thompson,
Here.
Wisman,
Here.
Rackison,
Here.
Bauer,
Here.
McErlane,
Here.
Potter,
Here.
Hooper, absent. We have 6 commissioners attending.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ellis. We will now go on to general public comment. During general public comment, the public is invited to make comments on items of public interest that are within the Planning Commission's subject matter jurisdiction that are not listed on the current agenda. Public comments are limited to 3 minutes per person. Depending on the number of persons wishing to address the Planning Commission, time will be allocated in equal shares totaling no more than 15 minutes. If anybody wants to make any public comments, please make sure they give their speaker cards to the clerk. Ms. Ellis, are there any speaker cards tonight?
There are no speaker
There are
cards.
no speaker cards. If there is anybody that wishes to speak now or forever hold your peace, or until the next Planning Commission. I don't see any, so we'll go ahead and close public comment. We will now move on to something slightly unique for our meetings, and that is I would like to request that we reorder the agenda tonight because we have Commissioner McErlane needs to recuse himself, so we would like to reorder things a little bit so that he can speak before he has to recuse himself. So I am proposing that we reorder the agenda so that the approval of the minutes and public hearings and matters for consideration will be acted upon before presentations so that the public hearing recusal can be facilitated. If I can please get somebody to move that approval, please do so now.
I'll move that.
Okay, can I get a second?
I'll second.
Okay, and can I get a roll call vote on that, please, Ms. Ellis?
Yes. Cater Thompson,
Here.
Wisman,
Yes.
Rackison,
Yes.
Bauer,
Yes.
McErlane,
Yes.
Potter, Hooper, absent.
Thank you very much. It looks like we can reorder the agenda tonight, and so we'll go on then and do the approval of minutes. Tonight we'll be approving minutes for the meetings of February 14th, 2023 and March 14th, 2023. Does anybody have any things on those minutes that they'd like to edit or add? I don't see any, so we'll go ahead and approve those minutes. And then we'll close that item, and we will move on to public hearings and matters for consideration. And tonight, when are we going to be doing the, Andrew, when are we doing then our comments, the planning manager's report is still going to come at the end? Yeah, okay, awesome. Okay, great. Okay, then tonight we'll be looking at now meeting item number 2, which is a public hearing for the summary vacation. Item 2, resolution making a general plan conformity determination and additional findings pursuant to Streets and Highways Code 8300 with respect to the vacation of a portion of an unused public alley easement located between Fair and Sheldon Streets, and recommending that the City Council adopt a resolution granting a summary vacation of a portion of the unused public alley. And this is my time where I will indicate that Commissioner McErlane will be recusing himself because he lives within 500 feet of the proposed because he lives within 500 feet of the property that we're talking about tonight. Commissioner McErlane, you need to recuse yourself.
Yeah, I was requested by the attorney to state that I am within 300 feet of the property, so I have to recuse myself. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner McErlane. So we'll go ahead now and have the staff presentation by our city engineer, Jeff Stutzman. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, everybody. Jeff Stutzman, city engineer, city of Petaluma. Thank you for having us. I also have Steve Frankie, who's the applicant's surveyor over here, as well as the owner, Nicholas.
I don't think your mic's on. I'm being told from someone watching that they can't hear it.
Is that better? There we go. Thank you. Sorry about that. Do you want me to repeat it?
No, I think it's okay. Go on.
Sorry about that. So I'll just, prior to 1979, the easement was a thoroughfare, so it was you were able to go from one side to another. When that vacation of easement happened in 79, 6 of those properties vacated that easement and basically created that alley as a dead end, preventing access from Dana Street to English Street. So it was kind of shortened that sense. It wasn't a full vacation of the easement, but a partial one at that point. Kind of setting the precedence of the use of this easement and the real benefit of it to the city. So as we kind of move to today, Nicholas reached out to me. He felt like there was an opportunity for him. He wanted to build an ADU. He needed the property to be able to set those offsets. He knew that the easement wasn't being used by the city, high weeds, gravel. So I talked to him about the process of doing a vacation. He got the help from Steve LaFranchi to kind of start that process, start the legal descriptions. He reached out to all his neighbors to see who would want to be interested. Obviously, the goal of it was to kind of band all the remaining neighbors together to get a kind of a complete vacation easements for the whole alleyway. For whatever reasons, some members wanted to be a part of it, others didn't. So we kind of ended up with the same situation we started with in 79 of 6 people were very interested in doing it. So we're kind of extending what we did in 79 to now where it's kind of a partial vacation of the whole easement. But nothing really changes because it's still a dead-end alley. And then a part of the vacation easements is appraisal. Part of our charter requires that if anything over $3,000 that the city encumbers property, it has to take it to council for an ordinance. And part of that ordinance is obviously we would be paying fair market value of that land. And in that case, you would get an appraisal to see what that value is. In this case, in lieu of doing a appraisal, we reached out to a firm who does these appraisals because in many cases like this where appraisal could cost more than the value of the land itself. So we reached out to him. His name was Jeff Hornsby. He does a lot of work in the city. He does a lot of work in Santa Rosa. It's kind of his niche is this type of land exchange. And I think one of the documents sent this late afternoon was an email from him just kind of saying what his perceived value of the land was. I mean, it's a dead-end alley. The city doesn't have any real benefit to it. No utilities. That it's really the cost of to each parcel is really less than $1,000, just because that's really like the administrative fee to make the transfer of land. There isn't much value in the land to the city. It's more in that little bit of land for them is more important. So we did that. Part of the appraisal kind of looks at utilities. I mean, we reached out to all the utility agencies. The city doesn't have any utilities in its alley. PG&E, AT&T, all the telecom folks that work in the city, they don't use this alley. They don't have any need to use it. And there's no easements either. As well as emergency services, talk to fire, they have no need for this alley either. They don't use it to respond to calls or need it to fight fires or anything like that. And then I think the main thing that comes down to is maintenance, right? It's an unimproved alley, so it's gravel. As you saw some of the photos today, the grass is high. It's a maintenance liability for the city because it doesn't meet ADA. There's gravel everywhere. It's an issue that requires city's attention. There's no drainage, so from the city's perspective, it has no value. It's something that makes us do more work than we really need to be doing right now. Focusing on other areas of mowing, gravel is something that we would rather do. And like with that, I don't know if Steve or if there's a time for Nick to come up and say anything either, but that's the end of my presentation. So I don't know if you guys have comments either.
All right, thank you very much, Jeff.
And
for
Chair,
that presentation. Yes?
could we do ex parte communications?
Oh, yes,
Just
thank
check?
you, yes.
Awesome,
Are
thanks.
there any ex parte communications right now? Nope, I don't see any, okay. Then we'll go on now to commission questions for staff. Okay. Commissioner Potter?
I was just wondering if you could clarify that the easement is not a property owned by the city, but is part of the property owned by these property owners over which the city has an easement for a potential future use or another use. So with that in mind, I'm just wondering if the city has the authority to vacate easements without property owner agreement, because we've spoken about a number of times that this has been a struggle to vacate the whole alley. Is it required that the property owner agree in order for the city to take an action such as that?
I can answer that one, Chair. No, it's not required, but obviously the city would obviously like to have the property owner's agreement before the city pursues any vacation. Yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, and I guess my point is that it has been a long time since 1979, but it does seem a little inefficient to proceed with these piecemeal-like and not have the full use of the alley, particularly because the use that's being proposed here is something consistent with our housing element and an idea that maybe neighbors would also want to, at some point, take advantage of building the ADU. So that's my only thought.
Okay, are there any other questions? Commissioner Rackison?
Yeah, just about this piece on the $3,000 threshold value. And from your statement, I think you kind of answered these two questions. But when we think about that value, is it the value of the parcel to the city, or is it a value of this 350 square foot parcel, kind of fair market value or value to property owner?
I think it's the value to the city, because that's when we're looking at it. If there's utility easements, it has a value to the city, because that's what they would be paying. Like if Nick were to purchase, if we were to vacate the easement, it had a value, he would be paying the city for that perceived value that the city has in it. But because we don't, there's nothing there. We don't have utilities. Like it's interesting alley, like what the purpose of it and what the history really was behind it. Because there are alleys that are used. There are alleys that that are good for utilities, and that. Like this case, there isn't any real need.
Well, it's an important distinction. I know Councilmember Cater Thompson posed a question before this meeting about the relative value given an ADU, and so that makes more sense if we're talking about the city's value, not necessarily the property holder's value. And then I'm assuming this applies to each of the vacated parcels in question, not the combined for all the area being vacated, right? This $3,000 threshold.
The 3,000, and you can clarify, but I believe the $3,000 threshold would be
Each 350 square feet because it's separate property owners?
Correct.
Okay. And then I have other questions just about, practical use of this area, but I don't even think those are relevant. I think that was my most important question. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Rackison. Commissioner Wisman?
Yeah, I had one clarifying question, I think it was on the premise of Commissioner Potter's question, which is the actual area that we're talking about. Who has title to that? Is it a part of the abutting property owner's parcel?
Yeah.
And so all we're talking about is the easement over that?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's interesting you say that, because if you go through that 1979, the original one, they made the distinction and they had to come back with a recusal of it to come back and say it was a vacation of easement. So it was very clear in documents that it was an easement over their land.
So there's no property transfer going on. It was just a vacation.
Yep.
Okay. I have a couple of other questions. First of all, the report indicated that it was initiated by the property owner at 417 Sheldon, but I believe it was 417 Fair.
Yeah, and I forgot to mention that. So there was a mistake. If you go down to the second paragraph in background, it would note it as 417 Sheldon Street, but it should have been 417 Fair Street.
Okay.
Apologize.
Okay. Can anybody inform us on how many vacations, single user vacations, have been requested or granted in the last
It's a hard one to answer.
It doesn't have to be.
I mean,
Is it 1 a year, 1 every 5 years?
we've had, I mean, I think since I've become city engineer, I think we've had the most. I think I've done 3 in the last year, but working with Steve, who's been a part of the city for a long time, trying to figure out the process and examples, there hasn't really been that many. The last couple I know have been, there's one for St. Vincent's in the past. We just did one for North River Apartments, Wallenberg Way. So there really hasn't been, the ones that I could think of have probably been maybe 4 or 5. So it doesn't happen very, very often.
Has the city rejected any of those applications?
No.
Apologies.
I mean, I still have a problem that, oh, sorry.
Yeah, the last question I have is, so once the easement is released by the city or vacated, are there any contingent liabilities the city has? Or do those go away? Or maybe the city doesn't have any liabilities right now as it is, but if the city does have liabilities, do those go away, immediately upon the vacation?
Yes, and I can answer that one, Jeff. So the city, as the easement holder, we have a right to maintain that easement. So as soon as it is vacated, the city would no longer have that responsibility to maintain, and the liabilities would go away.
Okay, and any underlying liabilities for hazardous waste or anything that might be there, those are either already assumed by the property owner or transferred to the property owner?
Correct.
Okay, that was it for me, Chair. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much, Commissioner Wisman. Council Member Cater Thompson.
Just for clarification, so you're saying that this is just an easement and those property owners actually own that easement?
Yes. I mean, they own the underlying fee title of it, and we have an easement over the top of it.
So they have the title to this, is what you're saying?
Yeah, we have, there is a easement over the top. And I don't know if, Steve, if there's any more clarification to that, but it is just an easement over the top. We don't own fee for that land.
So what is the difference? I mean, I don't know, I'm finding this very difficult to see that there's 15, 16, or 14, 15, 16, 7, 8, and 9 are not included in this. And I just don't feel like it's responsible just to keep piecemealing the same project since 1979. And so I feel like either it's all or none. And there, the property values, the property definitely has a larger value if you can put an ADU on there. But if they own the property, then there's no money exchange, correct? So but you did get an appraisal, is that right?
Yeah, we reached out to Jeff Hornsby to get what the perceived value of that easement would be because he was working on similar projects. There was one in Santa Rosa. That's where I was saying it really was, his cost was about less than $1,000 for that easement because there is no real value to the city to have that easement.
Well, I still have a problem that we're not bringing in everybody and we're just piecemealing this. And that was a problem back in 1979, and I don't think we should be moving in that direction.
Agreed. I think the ultimate goal would be to vacate the whole easement. I did not have the conversations with the other owners. I could imagine that it could be the process that Nick had to go through and work with Steve. It was possibly a cost issue. I mean, the amount of time. Yeah, it took a time and effort and money to put the legal descriptions together, to put the application together for staff to review and everything that's involved with the process. But I don't disagree with the whole thing. I mean, we've been piecemealing it. Could it be another 30 years? Do we come back and do the others?
And no, I don't want to do that. I'd
Agreed.
rather bring them all in at one time. And has staff actually gone and talked to all of those property owners to see if they wanted to be part of this?
I have not talked to all the property owners.
I would like to see staff talking to property owners about this and getting everybody included before I certainly can support it.
Okay.
Are you done, Councilmember Cater Thompson?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Correct me if I'm wrong, but we can't make the property owners buy into this, so to speak, right? I mean, because it is somewhat, costs some money and we can't force this upon them, right? It needs to be, they need to say okay to this.
So we can summarily abate. There's a couple prerequisites, I believe, that the city hasn't maintained it for 5 years or there hasn't been vehicular access for 5 years. But if we are able to meet those findings, then we could summarily abate without the property owner's approval.
Can we do that tonight?
Well, not tonight because I'd be concerned about the Brown Act that those properties weren't listed on the agenda title.
Okay. Okay, well, at this point, yes, Mr. Triple?
Sorry, I was going to make sure I turned it on. I did have a question for Assistant City Attorney Brady. Because this evening's action is a general plan conformance determination, could the commission still make a decision on the action before them, but direct staff to, before taking it to council for the summary vacation, direct staff to do additional work?
So, thanks, Andrew, for that question. How the resolution is drafted is it does make the general plan conformance finding, and then it makes recommendations for council to approve the summary of vacation. So we could get rid of those recommendation findings, but we would then need to come back to Planning Commission for those other 3 or 6 parcels out there that aren't involved with this summary vacation. So we would be back here regardless, I think, Andrew.
And can I follow up on that? Would that action cost the current parcel owners that are requesting this any additional money?
I don't know that question. I think the legwork's probably already been done.
I mean, it's somewhat of cost recovery. So the effort that it would take me, Dylan, whoever else is involved with it to do the public outreach, to do it, our time would be recovered, similar to
who?
like a planning project.
From
So,
the-
so there would be costs associated with doing that additional outreach.
From the applicants?
Yeah.
Right, I'm the only applicant currently. So
He-
I would be covering all the costs? Yeah. I just, that would be my
That's the rub, yeah.
So Heidi?
Okay, Commissioner Potter?
I'm wondering, because of the way that the resolution is drafted and the noticing occurred, if we could move forward with the recommendation on these 6 parcels, but with the direction then to staff to pursue the remaining parcels for a cohesive change in status for that alley.
Well, I think let's listen to public comment first, and then we can say what we think about this. We could share our comments on that, and that you could present that as an idea. Okay? All right, thank you. Okay, let's move on to general public comment now. Are there any, not general public comment on this agenda. Would anybody like to speak on this? Okay, if you, yeah, just when you come up, state your name, and then afterwards, I'd like for you to fill out a speaker card and give it to the clerk, please. Okay.
Hi, Nicholas Luciani. I'm actually the applicant for this motion. Just in general, I think over the past 5 years since I actually purchased the property, I've been attempting to kind of go down this road. And finally, last year, with Jeff's help, I was able to get to the point where I kind of understood the process and started having the conversations with a multitude of neighbors. I've already reached out to pretty much all of them. One of them happens to be a renter that I don't know the property owner actually. But of the people who live on the block, the ones that I'll call enlisted or asked for their participation in this, those are the ones who definitely wanted to get on board. All the other ones were not as enthusiastic. And to note on top of that, you talked about cost and kind of, recovery of cost. At this point, I'm the one paying for all of the cost incurred, whether that be Jeff's time, the city fees, or Steve LaFranchi's time to put together all the documents for this. So, yeah. And I think to answer the question, is it to Mr. Acusin? Is that correct? I think that if anything, right, the value to the city of an added ADU and the tax implications with that, right, going to have some fees on top of that with, planning and building, some added school fund, all those things are a benefit to the city, whereas currently it's a liability, like Jeff said. So want to make those two notes. And then, yeah, thank you very much for having me and seeing this on the docket and taking the time. So thank you
Thank you very
much.
much. Just, yeah, please do fill out a speaker card. Thank you. Mr. LaFranchi?
Yes, Steve
You have
LaFranchi,
two-
I'm the.
You have 2 minutes. You have 3 minutes too, and you need to also fill out a speaker card when you're done.
So Steve LaFranchi, I'm the project surveyor on this. And I think a little clarification is this isn't like a fee simple land, like a parcel of land. I mean, alleys and streets are this glorified easements, and it doesn't happen a lot in Petalum, as was stated, but to impose in taking the entire alley, it'd be, for instance, on St. Vincent's property, the Cherry Street, there was a number of parcels where the public right-of-way extended in, it wasn't being used, but it was that one vacation it didn't take all of the length of Cherry Street, it just took the one property owner who wanted that portion of it vacated. It's a little odd with the alleyway because it's a series of lots, but in principle, it's the same purpose. So, in a perfect world, it'd been great if everybody just, wanted it all vacated. But in other jurisdictions, other places, portions of streets and portions of alleys and easements, the entirety isn't always just vacated. There can be portions of it. So I just wanted to make that clear. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. LaFranchi. Please fill out one of those cards. And I think that's the last of the public comments, so we'll go ahead and close. Oh, yes, please do come up. Yep.
Sorry. I was in. Card as well.
And state your name, please.
My name's Dan Krieg, and I live at 421 Fair Street, which is just down, and the alley is part of my property as well. So, but just to answer the question in terms of all the neighbors, it's really, the original in 79 and, the year that it was closed off, that was a logical shut off because those neighbors decided to share that property. And this, again, to me, seems like, again, it's a logical stopping point because those 6 neighbors are agreeing, saying, hey, we want that property. So, and I'm at the other end. I'm at the part, I'm 2 from the end. So my section is not going to be blocked off. And that's fine with me. So, and I think that if I'm to speak for the other neighbors, it's similar from the standpoint that my neighbor next to me that's not going to have their property shut off, they as well are not interested in having that property. They prefer the alley. And then the person at the corner, same thing, that's a rental. So that property owner is not really anxious to get that property. And then there's the other property that joins that alley is 2 lots. One is a rental, and then one takes up 2 lots of that alley. So again, to answer, in my opinion, again, it seems like it would be a fine deal to do just, again, a sectional shutoff as opposed to trying to get everyone to agree to a full shutoff, which again, it was done in 79. It seems logical that it could be done that way, in my opinion, and I am one of the owners of the area. To me, I am fine with it being shut off at this point and that section behind me staying open.
Great. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now we'll close public comment and we'll move on to commissioner comments. And I think I'm going to go first. I usually don't, but I think I'm going to go first this time because I think this is our job. We serve the public, and to me, these people have had an easement over their property for many, many years now, and now is our opportunity to give those that paid for it and want it back. And I think they should be able to get it back now since we're not using it. Plus, I think it is a liability for the city. So I would gratefully remove the city of that much liability whenever we can. And I think if the other property owners at some point in the future want to come back and they change their mind and they pay for somebody to do the paperwork and they pay us for our cost recovery, for our city engineer, then let them do that in the future. That's their business, and we're here to serve. I don't mind really doing it piecemeal if we can make the lives of some of our residents better. So I am supportive of this as it stands. And I'll move on to other commissioners now. Commissioner Rakusin.
Thanks, Chair. I guess just a follow-up question from all this for city staff. Is there any downside to limiting it to this area? You know, we heard about 1979 was the first decision. We've kind of daisy-chained this onto that, particularly like CEQA considerations. I mean, is there any downside to doing just this part? And then if in 30 years we do another, aside from like our aesthetics of all these parcels being in one lump, is there a downside? Is there an additional cost for the city, liability for the city, danger we might have to do a more complex procedure later, anything like that?
No, it's from the city's perspective, it's kind of status quo. I mean, we've had 6 and now hopefully we'll get these 12. So then we're slowly shrinking it. So we're not adding to it. The maintenance cost is still there. It's a little less. But again, there's no additional liability associated with it.
Well, then just from everything I've heard, I don't think it's fair to burden the applicant with all the additional parcels. I think in terms of general plan conformance, we are advocating for more infill. We are advocating for density and efficiency when we can. And I think, this is definitely moving us in the right direction. It's pretty obvious. It would be great if we could vacate the whole area. But I think for the sake of this applicant and what we can get done now, I would support this as it is.
Thank you, Commissioner Rakusin. Commissioner Wisman?
I similarly, just from reading the report and hearing the testimony tonight, it appears that it's a net upside and no downside. As a matter of fact, I think the city is giving up, responsibilities and liabilities that right now have no value. So in vacating that easement, it's a benefit to the city. And it's also a relief and an encumbrance on the property owners. So I really see only upside and no downside. So I'm inclined to support it.
Okay, great. Thank you, Commissioner Wisman. Who's next? Councilmember Jane Cater Thompson.
So the remainder is not a liability now? The remainder properties? So we're talking about liability of one area, and now we're saying, oh, there's no liability, but yet there's liability. So who's going to maintain it?
It just stays kind of status quo, right? I mean, we city already maintains it. It's a city easement. It's an unimproved roadway. We are shrinking that area down by a quarter or so. So to say that there is no liability, some of that still continues, right? But it reduces some of it. I mean, it's not. I don't think we gain any liability by this action.
But we don't lose any either.
We don't necessarily lose anything. Yeah.
I'm going to stand the way I feel is that all these others should be included in it, and we should not be piecemealing because we've piecemealed a lot in this town, and this is an opportunity not to piecemeal. And I'm a little disappointed that staff didn't go out and send at least a letter to staff to the property owners that didn't want to participate. And I'd rather just do the whole thing and not for certain, just because 6 of them want it and the other ones don't. I just think it continues the 1979 thinking. And I understand the ADUs, but I'm not going to be held hostage by saying ADUs and we need the housing. We can use that excuse for any project. And I just think that the rest should be brought in, and I think staff should send a letter and meet with people and make sure that they're all included. And we'll see where it goes. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Cater Thompson. Commissioner Potter.
So I really appreciate the amount of work that's gone into this and the applicant's effort to be able to achieve his use of his property. And just for clarity, the parcels are not gaining property. They're just getting unfettered use of that part of their existing parcel for which there was an easement. The easement was placed there by the city historically for a transportation corridor that was being used. It's no longer being used. So part of our job as planning commissioners is to direct the orderly development of the land. And so that's where I come from in terms of if it's not going to be an easement for a potential transportation corridor, then it has no meaning anymore when it's broken up. I do support moving forward tonight with this proposal as requested by the applicant, but I would like to see some commitment in the future to think about what this property is and how we would like to see it being developed. And we can't do that when it's a patchwork of an easement that's not being used for any other purpose. And just because of the work that I've done, easements come from all kinds of jurisdictions, from utilities, from parks and open space, so they can be laid over on land for a lot of different reasons. And when they're no longer used, they are usually vacated, and often at no cost, especially if they've never been used. But it just seems like in this case, we could move forward with granting it in this part and then take a harder look at it in the future.
Thank you, Commissioner Potter, for those thoughtful comments. So I think we've all said our thoughts on this, so why don't we go ahead and we'll make a motion to, let's see, we'll make a motion, can I get a motion to make a resolution making a general plan conformity determination and additional findings pursuant to Streets and Highway Code Section 8300 with respect to the vacation of a portion of the unused public alley easement located between Fair and Sheldon Streets, and recommending that the City Council adopt a resolution granting a summary vacation of a portion of the unused public alley easement.
So moved.
So moved. Thank you, Commissioner Potter. And a second, please. Commissioner Wissman. Ms. Ellis, will you please take a roll call vote?
Cater Thompson,
No?
Wissman,
Yes.
Rackison,
Yes.
Bauer,
Yes.
McErling. Oh. Recused. Potter,
Aye.
Hooper, absent. That looks like four yeses, one no, one recusal, and one absent.
Thank you very much. We'll go ahead and close this public item. Thank you very much to the residents and applicants. Now we'll move on to meeting number 3, and we'll ask for Commissioner McGarrelane, if you could hear us, if you could please come back. Welcome back, Commissioner McGarrelane.
Thank you.
So we'll now move on to meeting item number 3, presentation for the general plan update. The general plan update, we're gonna look at the presentation of past, current, and future general plan update activities, review key planning commission input opportunities for the remainder of 2023 and beyond. So we'll go ahead and we'll have our staff presentation now. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners and Chair Bauer and Vice Mayor Cater Thompson. I am just trying to remove these black boxes from my shared screen. I'm sorry that I'm sorry, I'm fighting with Zoom. I'm trying to remove these boxes from the display. On each of your displays, do you see these obnoxious gray boxes also?
Yes.
Let's do something different. I apologize. Every time a computer gets plugged in, it wants to do something different.
gone.
Better. Let's see if I can get the whole screen to share. Sorry.
Commissioner Bauer?
Yes?
Oh, somebody was not getting sound, now they
Oh,
are.
they are getting sound, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, I think that we're going to vote for, I'm going to go with showing you the slides without the gray boxes, and I do apologize that that means that we're going to see some of the surrounding material, but I think that that's preferable to not seeing the whole slide. And I will try to make it as big as possible. And if somebody wants to come over here and whisper how to turn off notes while I'm talking, that'll be great. Okay. All right. So thank you for having me with you here this evening. I am here to talk a little bit about the general plan. Some of this will be not news to folks who have been here for a while or listening in for a while, but we want to make sure that everybody's starting from a place of understanding the general plan and the general plan's role in governing land use and what that means for the process of updating the general plan that we are well underway on. I'm going to go through an overview of the general plan and how that fits in with other planning tools that we have and other types of plans, talk about the essentials of a general plan and what it needs to include, the general plan workflow that we are going through, and the role of the Planning Commission in the general plan development process. We are updating the general plan because the community has been increasingly interested in updating the current document that we have. Much has changed since that time, particularly an interest in carbon neutrality, different focuses on the river, and many of the topics that you see here that aren't completely covered in the current general plan. Another important piece of the general plan effort is to establish methods and tools to implement this general plan. There are many wonderful ideas in the current general plan that were, for one reason or another, not brought to fruition. So we're looking at how we can remain nimble, keep the general plan a living document, and then also make sure that implementation is possible. And then we are legally compliant with state requirements. The general plan is our umbrella planning document. We can also develop the zoning code, which implements the general plan, functional or topic plans like a active transportation plan, or sub-area plans such as a specific plan or an area plan. These are each more detailed steps that we can take to provide additional guidance for development or to shape development in each of these areas. The city's role is to inform city council actions, as well as committees, boards, and commissions. City budget, ideally, the general plan will be tied to the city budget so that the city is able to implement the general plan. If that tie isn't made, then there can be a discrepancy between the goals and the actions the city is able to undertake. We're also engaging with residents, both in the development and the implementation of all of these plans. As a jurisdiction, we have a significant amount of ability to shape development, but are still reliant on the community to provide feedback, expertise, and then ultimately market forces to provide the development that we are working on shaping. So the general plan provides a larger vision and policy landscape. More topical plans are either specific geographically or for a particular issue, and then it's up to citizens and city leaders to follow the visions and policy directions and provide that market impetus for development. The purpose of the general plan is like a constitution for the city, and legally is important because it forms the basis for land use decisions that the city can make. It's also a long-term policy document to guide future actions and helps to establish that long-term vision of 20, 25, 30, depends on how optimistic you feel about how prescient we are at this time in anticipating what the future will be and shaping policies for it. But we do want to, again, while we're doing a long-term plan, put some tools in place so that we can be checking in regularly on the continued relevance of the general plan. And it allows the community to come together to develop a shared vision. The state of California does have some updated general plan guidelines that were issued in 2017. These are different than the ones that were in place for the last general plan, obviously. We have these 8 required elements. As you will remember from a couple of months ago, we have recently adopted updated housing element. So that's one of the elements, and we're working on updating all of the rest of them that are required. I do want to note that there's no planning period or no planning period requirement for a general plan. So unlike a housing element, which needs to be updated every 8 years, the state does not have a requirement for updating a general plan. And cities vary quite widely in terms of their approaches for updating. It can take some cities 40 years to decide that it's time to update their general plan. The average is between 15 and 20. Sacramento works on updating pieces of theirs every 5 years, again, in an effort to remain relevant. When we say, for example, the 2025 general plan that's currently in place, that date is not a deadline. That date is an estimate of the build out that is expressed and planned for in the general plan. Interestingly enough, the city isn't actually approaching that build out in terms of the number of residents that were anticipated in that plan. It is required that the general plan is internally consistent, and you'll notice that we are then constantly referring to general plan consistency in implementing general plan or the zoning code or other related documents, and we can't have elements that are in conflict within the general plan. So in the general plan, we set land uses, identify long-term direction, set metrics and targets, consider and work to mitigate environmental impacts. But while this is an exciting process to develop the general plan, it's not an opportunity to solve all of our issues. And it's a general plan, not a specific plan. So there's a certain level of detail that we'll be stopping at. The current general plan took 7 years to complete and was completed in a very different context during the Great Recession or just before it. There was no smart service, and now we're facing the increasing climate emergency and housing crisis. So these are some of the triggers for this general plan effort. You'll remember from a few slides ago that there are 8 required general plan elements. It's possible for a city to have a fair amount of license in terms of how the content required in each of those elements is arranged, and it's also possible to add extra elements, some of which the state provides guidance for and some of which they don't. For example, we have economic development, we have water resources in the current plan, and so while we're developing content, we're thinking about how all of these things knit together. We haven't ultimately decided what each of the elements are called, but we are covering all of the topics that are covered in the current general plan. I'm going to go through a few of the key elements. One is the land use element, which will be the next big piece that we'll be talking about with you. Defines the future allowable types, distribution, and intensity of parcels and includes a map or diagram. It includes density for residential and non-residential uses, and again, must be in concert with the rest of the general plan. This map then informs an update of the zoning code, which can be more specific and implements the general plan. The housing element was adopted in March of 2023. If anybody wants to talk about that later, I'm open to it, but I think we're okay for now. The circulation element is required to cover the circulation of people, goods, energy, water, sewage, storm drainage, and communications. Again, we may take that utilities piece out of the transportation element, for example, but still be covering those topics. And a new requirement is for a balanced multimodal transportation network. Safety element looks at mitigating and responding to natural disasters and other disasters, providing adequate safety service and facilities, and responding to climate change adaptation and resilience. And the environmental justice element is a new requirement. If a city has a the technical term for them is a disadvantaged community. That has a legal definition, though there's some debate about that term. If the city has disadvantaged communities, then there's a requirement to prepare an environmental justice element. We went through a fairly exhaustive analysis of Petaluma that we presented in the existing conditions report and are planning to prepare an environmental justice element. And that involves working closely with the members of those communities. Additional required elements include conservation, open space, and noise. So we'll be talking about ecosystem, open spaces, preservation of open spaces, how that works with the park system, who will be maintaining them, and how recreation and preservation work together, as well as how to mitigate and address noise impacts from transportation systems and other systems. We are currently in the process as a staff body of reviewing many of the draft plan frameworks that you see listed here. The draft plan frameworks are essentially the beginnings of the general plan policy development process. Some of them haven't been developed yet because of ongoing work that we're doing that will inform them, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But these are the topics that are significantly under study at the moment, and I'm going to walk through the process in a little bit to talk about what the review process will be. But I highlighted a few of them that are, for example, not required in the general plan requirements from the state. A little pitch for how to keep track of the general plan. There is a website at planpetaluma.org where we work on keeping everything up to date, and there's quite a bit of information on there. But just in general, thinking about the steps to develop the general plan, we go through an existing conditions analysis, making sure that we understand where we're planning, and then a vision process that concluded last year, thinking about what do we want to create. Because of our timing, we needed to insert the housing element process into this workflow. And we're in the process of developing those policy concepts that I just mentioned. The land use alternatives are what we're going to be talking about next. Again, thinking about where projected development could go. And so we're going to be coming to Planning Commission with alternatives and then recommendations on a final alternative, and then coming with a pretty significant chunk of policy work for your review. And then we're going to be working on that draft plan. I also want to note that as part of this process, we are working, in addition to some other things, on climate action and adaptation planning and flood planning. So I'll go into that in a little bit more detail. This is the current, I don't expect you to be able to read this, don't worry. This is the current flow. I just want you to get the impression that, at each major point of this plan, we are coming to the Planning Commission to check in and receive input. We have monthly meetings with the General Plan Advisory Committee. With every stage, we also go out to the community to get feedback. And then this shows how the housing element, flooding and sea level rise modeling process, climate adaptation planning, and then environmental analysis and compliance all are necessary parts and feed into the general plan. I think folks are pretty well aware of where we are with the housing element. I do want to note in a little bit more detail that we are in the middle of a process to develop a public draft greenhouse gas reduction strategy across quite a few different areas in which the city can impact that, including municipal operations, transportation, electrification of new and existing buildings, etc. And so that is we're planning to bring that out in the spring. And then we are going to work on whether that comes to the Climate Action Commission and City Council for acceptance, or if we wait until we have environmental documentation on that and adopt it with the general plan. We also have heard from many community members that folks wanted to look in detail at the FEMA flood maps. And so the city has undergone a significant effort with the consulting firm West Consulting to update our flood model. And the state of the art has changed quite a bit from when the FEMA model was adopted. And so we're working with them and in fact with General Plan Advisory Committee member Roger Leventhal to make sure that we are using the most current defensible methodology to develop floodplain modeling. And so that's really cutting edge work, and we hope to bring some of the results of that forward. Importantly, it will inform our land use alternatives to a certain degree, and then certainly our adaptation planning that you'll see policies for in the general plan. While we were working on that mapping, we've been working again on developing these policy concepts. I'll say this a couple of times, but the way that we develop each of these pieces of the general plan is to work with the GPAC, the General Plan Advisory Committee, in a fair amount of detail to receive input on what folks would like to see that relates to the vision that the GPAC developed. We also work with the community and then get best practices from the consulting team to develop draft material. The plan thereafter is then to bring that material to Planning Commission for high-level recommendations and then ultimately recommendations on direction to City Council. I spoke about the land use alternatives. After that moves forward, then we're going to be coming with the policy framework and draft plan and final plan. So after the content is developed and the General Plan Advisory Committee gives us quite a bit of feedback, we do several rounds of revision and then bring material forward. We want to welcome the Planning Commission to be involved in those conversations as community members. There are quite a few of them. That's really where the content development and the brainstorming happen as part of this work. And then it's Planning Commission's role to provide very high-level feedback and recommendations to City Council. We realize going into this that it's a lot of content. And so for certain parts of the planning process, we're going to be welcoming commissioners to provide written feedback. We will probably come with hundreds of pages of material, and we do want your ideas. It will take a long time to read all of that into the public record. So the plan is that we'll welcome folks to provide written feedback, and that we'll put that in the public record and incorporate that into our revision process. Just as Commissioner Potter was describing, one of the primary roles of the Planning Commission is to look at the responsible development of land. So we just wanted to highlight that here, and one of the key places to weigh in on that will be in the land use planning process, land use alternatives. So I just want to note finally that the general plan, while it is a 20-year document, it is a document that can be revised. Again, we're planning on putting metrics for tracking success and timelines for evaluating a variety of different elements so that the document can remain useful for a fairly long time. Thank you. That is the conclusion of my presentation.
Right. Thank you very much, Ms. Paul, for that very thorough presentation. I wanted to have some clarity before we move on, and maybe it could either come from you or Mr. Triple. A little bit more, can you a little bit clearer explain to us what our role is? I know, GPAC has their role, community members have their role, City Council have their role, and us as planning commissioners, because I know it's not our role to do the work of the GPAC, right? That's their role. But, what is our role exactly in this?
Yes, I'll start, and I welcome Mr. Triple to give some feedback as well. And hopefully Vice Mayor Cater Thompson comes back, as she was just a member of the GPAC very recently. But the GPAC is a large community body, a 24-member body that was entrusted by City Council with the role of being primarily responsible for helping to steer and inform the general plan development process. And so those folks have the vast majority of them been with us since the beginning of the general plan development process. While they have quite a range of areas of expertise, they now are pretty in the weeds in terms of what the many different factors are that we need to be considering as part of the general plan. We, for example, on the housing element, the General Plan Advisory Committee convened several working groups to discuss and cover major considerations for the general plan, and those groups did outreach to the community and gave us feedback on key considerations for the policy development process. We then, after that, incorporated their ideas and have gone back to the General Plan Advisory Committee to discuss each of the topics and get feedback on preliminary direction. So it's a fairly exhaustive and detailed process that they're going through to provide detailed feedback on the development of the content of the general plan. So that role is filled. And we also welcome community members throughout that process to give feedback. And then the role of the Planning Commission is to review that. You have a different point of view that you get from serving on this body. And so it's valuable to get your input. But by the time something comes to the Planning Commission, it has been significantly reviewed by the community and by staff. And so at that point, we're not really in a creative process, we're in a revision process. So it's helpful to get high-level comments. If there's something detailed, then we welcome those comments as well. But ultimately, it's the role of the commission to provide input to City Council on what they should suggest and require as the ultimate decision makers. Mr. Triple, anything to add?
Well, I think that's a great summary, and Vice Mayor, if you would like, we'd love for you to share some of your experiences from serving on the GPAC and how that content development looks or feels. If you'd like to, that would be great.
Sure.
But if you need a minute,
I
I
have
can go ahead
allergies,
and
so
talk.
I have a cough drop in my mouth. Sorry about that. I mean, it is an exhaustive process, and it has been from the beginning. We started, with COVID. It's been on Zoom, which has a lot of pros, but it has some cons because you can't get together. What I did learn recently, I was at a League of California Cities forum in Sacramento. There are cities in this state that have never updated their general plan, which was shocking to hear. And, a lot were surprised at how often, the city of Petaluma updates, which is really positive. But, it's a pretty diverse group. Everybody has their expertise, and they're bringing that forward. And I just want to give kudos to Roger Leventhal, because that's the area for me that is really important, is sea level rise, climate change. And we're really lucky to have him on the general plan, going through the information with city staff. I mean, he seems to be part of staff, which is really great. Looking forward to finding out when the housing element, comes back, to see if ours is passed, which I'm hoping it does. And I like the idea, I'm just looking at some notes of what Christina said, but, like the greenhouse gas reduction, really diving into that. And so it's an exhausting process, but in the end, it's going to be a good document. It's going to be for 2023 and above. So we're not going backwards. So that's it.
Thank you. That's very good.
Great, thank you, Vice Mayor. I think also, part of the conversation this evening that we want to share with you is that while the content development is happening in a variety of other contexts, please take the advantage of the opportunities to participate in those community meetings, to, share with your GPAC members, to share with staff. There's often times where, I'll email Christina and say, I came across this challenge, and maybe is the general plan looking at it? So I think that we each see the plan from a different perspective based upon what our roles are. And we want to be sure that the content development process is receiving those inputs so that as it does move through the process and come to you for that review and recommendation to council, when it is very difficult to go back and modify content at that point because of the way it develops at such a massive scale, that we're ensuring that you're feeling confident that it's reflecting the priorities that you bring as commissioners.
Great, thank you. Wonderful. Okay, now we'll move on to commissioner questions and comments. Commissioner Rackison.
Yeah, and I just want to thank Christina for a great presentation. It's kind of my MO that I come to a city council meeting and make general public comment about something I want to see, and then the next day, staff was already thinking of it and had a presentation. So somehow I'm not surprised. So thank you for that. And, one big question, I'm going to try to give some form to this. I've heard a lot of people tie updates to IZO, Muni Code, directly to the completion of the general plan. Is that literally the trigger? Does some of that happen in parallel, as your team, as planning, is understanding what's coming through GPAC? They're in the, waist deep in content creation. Are we already thinking about structuring the IZO, municipal code, what those updates will look like? I've heard and I've read the 2008 general plan, lots of great ideas in there. And then it didn't really translate all the way through to the code piece of it. So I guess to put that in the form of a question, how do we avoid that? And then, when do we start updates to IZO and Muni Code? Is there any way to get a jump start on that, start reviewing those ideas? Or is it literally we have to have the general plan on the books and then that process begins?
Yeah, thank you. So it is possible to update parts of the IZO in an ongoing way. We're in the process of updating our ADU standards, for example, so it's possible to do those targeted updates. It is the plan that the comprehensive update of the zoning code will be reflective of the general plan direction. It doesn't necessarily mean that we can't start that process before the general plan is adopted, and that's our intention, is to start the process before the general plan is adopted. As you will recall from many of the projects that you see, the CEQA process, the environmental analysis and compliance process, can be lengthy and will likely take, just shy of a year for the general plan. And so during that time, once we get a fairly clear idea of the direction of the general plan, it's possible to start that IZO work. But it's unlikely that we'll adopt a comprehensive update to the IZO before the general plan is adopted.
And I think, Chair Rackison, if I might add, we do, staff does maintain what we call the red line IZO. And so we're constantly documenting updates that need to happen to the IZO that we come across in our daily work. It always fascinates me that there's never any limit to the questions that can be asked about a zoning code. It's really truly the gift that keeps on giving, I think. But so we do maintain the red line document to capture updates that need to happen at some point in time. As Christina said, we will be bringing forward this summer a group of ordinance updates and amendments that will reflect state law that has been adopted that we need to incorporate. And we move at varying speeds on incorporation of that, depending upon the significance of it, how much it might impact our daily work, as well as in the case of, we'll be bringing forward some child daycare amendments to align us locally with state law. And that's really to support development of child daycare, in-home child daycare opportunities, because the state is recognizing that they need a lot of support to be able to generate the supply commensurate with demand. So we're constantly looking at it, but we do have to sometimes make those decisions on when updates will come forward. The comprehensive update will be a significant update to the code.
Well, and what I'm hearing, it's not necessarily going to get short shrift. I mean, the mindset is clearly focused on updating, closing loopholes, being in coherence with the general plan as it comes together. And it is occurring somewhat in parallel, whether that's informally with staff. So I really like hearing that. And then, my other question that I had in here was baked into, along those lines, other parts of, city policy, and whether that's committees and commissions, shaping of how we organize as a city. Do we plan any shakeups with that, alongside the general plan? Or again, are those something kind of totally separate? I think that's been floating around a little bit, that there may be a shakeup to committees and commissions, and whether or not that's tied to general plan in any way, or if that's kind of a separate item, again, with some informal, input from this GPAC process.
Looking at the draft policies that we're beginning to see, there are some recommendations or options that are listed for how a body of the city council, advisory body or whatever it is, can enforce help with implementation of the policies, or so that is something that can be talked about as part of the general plan. I don't have a firm understanding or a firm point that I'm going to make about how that might happen. But it's something that can be talked about and directed or recommended as part of the general plan.
Yeah, I realize that question's a little amorphous, but I'm trying to get at kind of these broad impacts we might see and how they align with the completion of the general plan. What I'm hearing, what I like to hear, is that these efforts are already starting. We're not going to get caught flat-footed when it comes to codifying the outputs of these kind of policy updates and visions, which I think is terrific. So those are my questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Rackison. Other Commissioner Wisman.
Yeah, just a couple of clarifying questions. The housing element obviously is one that we've spent a lot of time on or are very aware of. Is that the only element out of those 8 or more that are subject to state approval?
That's correct.
Okay. And if we are not successful getting adoption of the housing element, will that at all delay the general plan adoption, or can the two continue to kind of move in parallel?
So if HCD, Housing and Community Development, don't certify the housing element in this round, we will just keep going until they do. I don't anticipate that it'll have a major impact on the general plan schedule.
Okay. And so other than the housing element, all of the other elements, are they, at this point, I'm looking at the schedule on your very helpful website. Are all those other elements completed?
So what we have right now is we have administrative draft policy frameworks, which is like the underpinning of all of the policies in the general plan, on the not all of them, but like 12 different topic areas. So we haven't written the elements or determined where each of the topics should go or be treated in the general plan. There are different ways that it can be structured. The general plan can be structured so that it's targeted towards implementation, so that, for example, what public works would touch would be we would try to cluster that in elements so that they would know where to look for their direction, or we would know where to look for direction relative to that kind of work. So the elements aren't completed. We do have policies on the vast majority of those topic areas. Land use, for example, because we are working on the sea level rise modeling, we don't have a draft yet. And adaptation similarly.
Okay, great. Well, thanks very much for you and all your team's hard work. a huge process, and looks like we're on pace and coming up with a good document at the end of it. So thank you.
Chair Wisman, one thing I would like to point out that is a bit unique about the housing element, implementation of the housing element program is driven in part by state regulation. So we do have deadlines for meeting some of the implementation requirements, and that is a bit different than some of the other elements that will come forward, where other implementation of policies that are reflected in other elements may be driven by goal dates within the element themselves, but not necessarily by state requirements for implementation. So we will see action around implementation of the housing element in the near term because it will be required by state.
And one final thing, I heard you talk about the schedule on the general plan website. The general plan, the schedule is correct in terms of the sequence, but because of needing to go forward with the housing element first, and also because of needing to wait for the results of the flood sea level rise modeling, we are re-looking at our schedule. So we'll have to, we're working on an updated schedule.
I have a question about whether or not the opportunity sites for housing that required land use designation changes in the general plan happen during the housing element adoption, or is there going to be some kind of consistency correction when we do the land use element to basically implement that housing?
So each of the opportunity sites in the housing element are currently adequately zoned for the development that we projected in the housing element. So we don't need to do any zoning updates for the current housing element.
Thank you. Councilmember Cater Thompson?
When do we expect the sea level rise information to come back? A month, 2?
So it's a moving process right now. We got a round of draft maps from the consultant and then worked with Roger Leventhal and Chris Chu from Marin to do some review, which sent the consultants back for another round and essentially for a more comprehensive methodology. And so we're just beginning to see preliminary results from that we will need to potentially do some peer review on because there's not really an established, like we are in the middle of establishing the best practice for how to do this, and we want to make sure that we get it right before we put any maps out. So I was having meetings about that today. I wish that I knew. But the hope is that the maps have a couple of different impacts. On the one hand, they will inform our land use and adaptation policies. On the other hand, they will inform a future update to our FEMA map. Those are two separate processes to a certain extent. So it could be possible that while we're working through some map revisions, we can move forward with the general plan work.
I appreciate that because this is really an important part since, we're known for flooding. And so appreciate that. And I'd rather spend more time or have more length and get it done right. So, and do you know who would do the peer review?
That's just an idea that came up today. I am not a flooding modeling, precipitation, sea level rise modeling expert. And so I don't know who it is, but I think that we have to look for those folks.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Commissioner McErlian?
Yeah, a question, several questions.
Microphone, Commissioner McErlian?
Excuse me. Thank you. I like the idea of the general plan being a bigger vision, more cohesive, comprehensive vision. And I just wonder where in the general plan, I didn't see it in the general plan documents, but issues related to sense of place, physical design, what it looks like, what it feels like, all the public corridors that form that image, all the main boulevards, the roads, the Petaluma River corridor. I don't see those treated as any kind of structural framework or any idea in the general plan of what role they play or what policies are going to be developed to protect them. Streets like Petaluma Boulevard should have an idea what it could be, what it should be, what are the priorities, how do we achieve them? Does it exist? So nothing happens. They pave the whole road and do nothing. Add a bike trail and they feel successful. But I'd like to find out, where does this whole concept of what is Petaluma? What does it feel like? What does it look like? All the public corridors are public spaces. That's what formed the image of Petaluma for most people. And there's nothing I see that deals with it. The other thing, there's a 1996 Petaluma River Corridor enhancement. Is that going to be re-enhanced or revised? Because it's certainly something is needed to deal with the Petaluma River as an urban design, ecological design element. But is that part of the general plan?
Yes, thank you. And we did have a General Plan Advisory Committee Sense of Place working group that provided some input onto what kinds of policies they would want to see. There's also a significant amount of that kind of language around sense of place in the vision document. So we anticipate that the draft policies around that will be coming with the land use chapter and that policy framework. In terms of the river enhancement plan, whether or not that document specifically gets updated or some other document that covers the same topics, I think is something that we can talk about. But updating those policies is something that's in the current draft.
Okay. What about the urban design component? Is that?
So yeah, urban design and sense of place will be in the land use as well as transportation chapters. We are, for example, working really closely with the folks who put together the Sustainable Design Assessment Team, the SDAT process that was last summer. The folks came to town to talk about what should we do with our arterials and how could we create neighborhood hubs. So that's something that's really top of mind for the planning department and is going to be worked into the general plan.
Right. Thank you, Commissioner McGarreline. And I just have a general question. If we as community members and planning commissioners have anything specific like what Commissioner McGarreline was saying that we wanted to see that the GPAC might consider as they're moving forward, we are welcome to submit those as comments, right? So, that might be useful for them to see coming from us. So
Yeah, certainly.
that's always an available option to us, right? Okay, good, thank you.
Can you tell me on that process of who to send it to or what?
You are welcome to send any recommendations that you have to me. There's also a general plan working group. They're not particularly active right now because they provided a lot of feedback that we're working on encouraging. So I think right now, if you send it to me, I can share it with the rest of the GPAC.
Yes, Commissioner.
I just want to follow up with what Heidi was saying. I think it's really important that the commissioners send comments in. I mean, it makes a big difference. And I appreciate Commissioner Recusen's, comments on, it just kind of leads right into the general plan. And please do. I think it's really important.
I agree. I think we have a lot to say, and getting that information to the right committees is important. So having a way to do that is a good idea. Commissioner Rackison?
Just to follow up on Commissioner McGarreline's point, objective design standards, we've talked about it a lot. I'm assuming the general plan has to have reference because we are, looking at some state laws that are going to move us more in that direction. Is that planned in parallel? Again, is that because we've got some massive updates going on all over the place? Where does that fit into the general plan puzzle, as it were?
The objective design standards, development of the objective design standards is in the housing element as one of our policies in the housing element, so that is there. And we have a draft, and as you just noted, there are lots of things going on. So we're working on doing some refinements of that document and then plan to do some community outreach. For the folks who were on the commission a couple of years ago, I think at this point, We did do some outreach to begin to develop the design standards with local architects and affordable housing developers. So we plan to do some outreach again to talk with them about more specific draft language as well as some climate action commission members. And we plan to bring that document to Planning Commission for a working session, workshop, and then for approval. So it will come back a couple of times.
Councilmember Cater Thompson?
Is the commission going to be meeting in person? I know that they're still doing Zoom.
The GPAC.
The GPAC.
The idea is that we're working towards a mapping, a flood model meeting with them. And the idea is that that will be in person and at the rec center so that there's a fair amount of space so that community members can participate as well. I don't think that our regular meetings are going to be in person, but we're working on scheduling an in-person meeting for that, particularly because it's helpful to look at these very detailed maps as really big maps, and so that's better to do in person.
Okay, and sometimes I ran into people that were in the commission, once we didn't have our masks on. I didn't even know that one person was tall, one person was short, because you've just been on Zoom the whole time. So I think it's really a good connection for the group to meet in person. And this is the perfect one to meet with. So there's no date, obviously.
Well, we were working on doing that for the May meeting, but given the new mapping, I need to confirm that with the staff.
Thank you. I just have one question about the flood map. So I was really happy to hear that that is being updated because that was long overdue. And I'm glad that Roger Leventhal's involved because he's really bright and is, at the cutting edge of that. So I'm really happy to have him on board. And I was just wondering if the updated flood map, maybe if that would at all change any of the land use zoning possibly going forward and how that would work.
Potentially.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, yeah.
And we'll see that, I suppose, if that happens. How would that happen?
Well, I think that would be part of the adaptation planning and that would feed into the land use map.
Okay.
So that's some of what we're looking at when we're trying to develop the land use map. We're hoping to have these maps kind of finalized so that we get an idea of the impacts and where land uses could potentially change, or where there is, for example, there are developed parcels that are in the floodplain, and so would redevelopment on those parcels need to have particular adaptations to account for increased risks that from sea level rise and climate change. And one of the major pieces of this effort is not only looking at a more precise 100-year, so 1% chance every year flood map, but also looking at the impacts of climate change and sea level rise as that changes with climate. So we're looking at the water coming down the river and all the tributaries, as well as the water coming up the river, and what happens if water is going in both directions at the same time, what the likelihoods of those things are, and then how do we plan for various risk levels and potential various levels of inundation.
Great, thank you. Any other comments? Not right now? Okay, it looks like then we're going to open public comment. So we're going to open the public meeting and we'll be opening public comment. But I don't see anybody here, so we'll be closing public comment. Okay. Okay, then I think we'll be closing this meeting and we'll continue on. Now we'll move to our business part of the agenda, and that's starting with commission comment. So we'll be starting with our council member liaisons report, and that will be Council Member Cater Thompson.
Recently, I was at the League of California Cities in Sacramento. I just went for one of the 3 days. But one thing that's really important, and I just want to talk about, is an example, the fairgrounds property. If the state actually has the lease, then the state is actually looking at state lands to put housing on there. And that would be, you know, a perfect area for the state to look at. And that was very clear in these meetings, that that was a direction that Wiener wants to go. So they're updating policy. And so just to put that in your minds. The other thing is SCTA, Sonoma County Transportation Authority, is looking at doing some sort of a tax measure for climate. So they're trying to figure out who'd support it, what's the threshold, and what direction. Is it a parcel tax, or is it a bond, or is it an airport tax? I mean, it could be all different directions. And so we're moving on that, and I'll know more next month. And that's pretty much it.
Thank you very much. Is that, are you kind of thinking about a carbon tax or something like that?
Looking at all kinds of different options. We're actually looking at about 3 options to do polling. And so, you know, I'm not sure if a sales tax would go. I mean, Petaluma's at 9.5. Some, you know, cities are at 8, but everybody's around 9. And I think the threshold is 10.25, which is, you know, it's a big ask. And so I can't give you a good answer because I really don't know until the next meeting to see how they're going to pull it together and decide what 3 questions, you know, or options, and how to frame those for a poll.
Okay, great. Thank you. Now we'll move on. We have the PBAC, and that would be Commissioner Hooper, but he's not here today, so we'll move on to the Tree Advisory Committee, and that's Commissioner McCarroline.
Yeah, the Tree Advisory Committee, we're succeeding in meeting. We're revising the tree list. It's in process. And we also had some limited input with the city engineer in trying to, together with Relief, trying to add trees to the improvement plans for Maria Drive, Maria and McDowell. It's kind of late, it's under construction, so it's a little late in the game to add trees. So we had some input, and I hope they still have to get approval and budget approval from council for the city manager, but I hopefully will get a few more trees along these streets, which need it. But the engineer felt very kind of interested in trying to improve what the engineering department is doing in terms of planting trees with streets, which is a big foot in the door, I think, for us. So the tree committee expressed interest in being aware of other streets that are coming up and how we can be of assistance. So that was left. Then I kind of discovered that there's a meeting tomorrow on the D Street improvement. And again, the tree committee is not aware of any involvement. It has not been part of this, but D Street, in my mind, is one of the most iconic, important streets in all of Petaluma. I mean, Petaluma Boulevard downtown, and then D Street is the image street, the high real estate street, historically very important in what it did and what it still needs to do. And there's very little protection or ideas about how to formulate that. So the meeting is trying to solve traffic problems, accident problems, rear end collision and stuff. But it feels to me like it's more of a bike trail solution that everything else is wrapped around. And I'm a little concerned that a committee studying D Street and making decisions, improvement decisions, without the involvement of the tree committee, without the involvement of any urban design skill set, are going to make decisions that don't necessarily make the best results. And I'm a little concerned that even the tree committee is operating somewhat on their own, doing their own thing, and I don't understand who's coordinating, who's trying to piece together these things, because the overall vision needs to drive these committees, not the committee driving their own sense of purpose. And I don't see that overall vision happening. And I don't know who should do it or what's the best way to do it, but you know, putting, I mean, even on B Street, there's some experiment where they moved the stop signs and put some temporary curbs out there and painted some stuff, and it looks like a dumb Rube Goldberg solution by the engineering department. But I have no idea what they're trying to do or what it solves. But things like that destroy the quality of the streets and destroy the image of Petaluma. And I think, you know, little by little, D Street is losing the image. Trees are dying, trees are taken down, not replaced. But I don't see that urban design sense of place attitude driving things, and I think it should. So I'm wide open for, this is not meant to be a discussion as much as my sense is just being part of the tree advisory committee and seeing other committees, what they're doing, and realize that there's no coordination. Unless everybody goes to everybody's meetings, which gets to be kind of very difficult. So that's my concern.
Thank you, Commissioner McCarroll. Those are valid concerns. Okay, well, then we'll move on to the planning manager's report by Mr. Triple.
Great, thank you, Chair Bauer. I hope that you enjoyed the general plan presentation this evening. We were excited to be able to bring that to you and have that conversation. We're at a sort of a pivotal point with that planning process, and so I think it was great to reconnect with it and learn more about how we move forward with it. Just a couple of brief notes. I wanted to mention, I hope you enjoyed the meeting minutes, or at least found that there was an improvement over the prior minutes that we've brought forward to you. We are working to try to find that balance of providing information, but at the same time respecting the direction that we're given by the city clerk to have that action or decision-making minutes for the board, for the commission rather. One thing that we have started doing, if you notice at the end of the minutes, we're including the link to the video. Because that's where you can, experience the meeting in its entirety, and we'll continue to do that. So please just give us some feedback if we're still not hitting quite on point with those minutes. But I think Evelyn enjoyed having, with the new system that we've gone to, PrimeGov, we can now generate that transcript, and that actually helps us a lot to be able to pull some content out of it and drop into the minutes. So I wanted to mention that. The next is we have made some updates to the planning project's webpage, as well as sort of recreated the public comment, public participation webpage. Those upgrades were driven in part by trying to gain consistency with the entirety of the city's website. So there are sort of design standards and web page standards that we needed to comply with. We may have gotten carried away a little bit, but we were trying to bring that back in. But then also we wanted to, as we've started generating the new postcard public notices, and we're using QR codes and directing people to those pages more specifically, we wanted to make sure that we weren't sending people down a click hole, if you will, and frustrating them. So we wanted to lift up some of that content and make it more apparent. I know that there was a comment about, a public comment that was received about not listing administrative review projects on our public projects page. We have been listing them since last fall as a project is noticed for a decision by the director. We do add it to that page. So the public comment was correct. We're not showing projects prior to, I think, November of last year. But that was when we actually started increasing the transparency of those administrative actions. So I did want to point that out in response to that public comment. The other is we've been working on the 2023 Planning Commission work, or Planning Division work plan, coordinating with the city manager and community development director. I do have the draft plan that I want to talk through this evening, and then I'll be able to share that with you as we make some final modifications to it. In terms, I know that the activity of the commission has been a bit slow this spring. We realize that we are driven by the number of projects that we bring before you, as well as the status of those projects. And we have some very, very large, complicated projects that are working through the planning review process. But I can tell you that we do anticipate having meetings through the end of July. So each of the regularly scheduled meetings would have at least one project review at it. And the next ones, I believe we're looking at May 9th, would be Oyster Cove Mixed-Use Neighborhood Project. And then on May 23rd, we have tentatively agendized the Floodway Market Conditional Use Permit Appeal. So those will be coming forward in May. And then June and July, we'll have a mix of study sessions as well as public hearings. But I would expect that, look forward to the objective design standards coming forward as a workshop as well. We have that targeted currently for July 25th, but I'm thinking that may slip into August. And then we're going to be bringing forward a group of ordinance updates and amendments. I'd mentioned them earlier, the child daycare amendment to our land use, allowable land uses, a visitability ordinance amendment, which is responding to some design-related issues with compliance with the visitability ordinance as it's currently written. The ADU ordinance amendments, which are updates that are driven by state regulations that have been adopted over the past year. The state density bonus ordinance amendment, again, driven by state regulations. And then finally, the SB 9 implementation ordinance. Currently, we have all of those scheduled to come before you at the end of June. But I'm anticipating that given the amount of time that we need to work on them, that we'll probably push that back about a month as well. So, as a bit of the, I guess, stepping behind the scenes, when we start working on even an update to an ordinance, we can be looking at, depending on the extent of the update and what's driving it, anywhere from 20 to 40 hours just to do the drafting of the ordinance. Then we've got about almost another 40 hours to put together the meeting item packet that you receive and do the noticing that we need to do and such. And then we start the process of actually bringing it forward to you. So we are, when we look across those, even just those 5 amendment packages, it's a significant amount of staff time that goes into bringing that forward to you. So just know that those are on the way, as well as then we're looking at September and October. It does look like we'll have a couple of other ordinances that are being worked on that are part of the council's priority goals that we anticipate bringing forward. So I think you'll experience a busy year through the remainder of the year as we work at a variety of levels.
When will you have those more published?
With this? Yeah. Well, I'll be out of the office the rest of this week, but as soon as I get back next week, I hope to make the updates to them and have it available. Yeah. The next thing, as the Planning Commission, as one of the committees, commissions, and boards, we administer them. Evelyn is clerk, myself as staff liaison on behalf of Planning Division. We administer the Planning Commission, HCPC, and the Public Art Committee. And so one of the things that we've been looking at for Planning Commission to respond to specifically a public hearing, I think several months ago now, where we went late into the night, is looking at strategies that we can take to be able to have those meetings that don't run so late. One of them I think you'll see is we're working with the chair to be very conscious of the tentative agenda items and doing a better job of predicting the amount of time it would take to hold a public hearing. But we have checked in with the city clerk and learned that the commission's enabling legislation would allow the commission to set its start time. And we wanted to offer the opportunity to you to inform staff if you might be interested in adjusting your start time to 6 p.m. If you feel that you would want to go earlier than 6 p.m., we'll work on that as well. But 6 p.m. I think feels like it might be a reasonable time for those of you who work and have other commitments. So Chair, if you
Yeah.
would like to take that up.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. And yeah, I think that I personally would really appreciate it being earlier. And I did a little research into this on when the other planning commissions meet in the county, and I think, and other actually nearby counties too. And I researched, I think, 9 other planning commission meetings, and all but one of them start at 6 or earlier even. So we are one of the only ones that start at 7. There was one other one that started at 7, but I think starting earlier will, I'd appreciate it because I get tired and I get up early, and yeah, and I think earlier would be better for members of our community too, for the most part, because a lot of us get tired early, and our brains don't work after a long day of working, and so I would like to invite the other commissioners to speak and let us know what they think of these things. Yes.
Well, as I was looking at the agenda today, I was wondering, why aren't we starting at 6? It just doesn't seem to make sense to start at 7. And so I certainly would support that.
Thank you. Yes, yes. Commissioner Rackison?
Can I move that item now to update it to 6? To have us use the power of our enabling legislation to move that meeting to 6.
Nice. Okay. Commissioner Wissman?
Yeah, I'm supportive of
Awesome,
6
thank
a.m.
you.
I'm
Okay,
supportive.
all right. Commissioner Potter?
Yeah, I'm supportive. I also think it's adds an efficiency for our
Mm-hmm.
consultants and our staff who usually finish their work at 5 o'clock. Thank you.
Agreed. Good job. Okay, thank you. It looks like we are unanimously in
Great.
favor of that.
Well, I will work forward on it,
Nice.
and hopefully at the next meeting have an update for you. If not, the opportunity to shape your future. How
Thank
does
you.
that sound?
The only thought I just had is that if we should change the start time of the meeting, I think it would be good to have a really bold notice early,
for sure. Very
well
much
ahead
so.
of the change, so
Yes.
that folks can get accustomed to the
Be
difference.
a little bit of marketing involved, yep.
Did I
Sure.
hear pizza mentioned?
What's that?
Did I hear pizza mentioned?
That would be, you would have to talk to your council liaison about budget for food.
Yes, Council
I
Eason.
just want, it seems like the Planning Commission and the City Council both should have Zoom. And I would hope that that would happen in the near future. You're having some big projects coming up. And, a lot of people can't participate, can't get into City Hall. And it just seems, at least for Planning Commission and City Council, it would be reasonable.
Thank you. Good point.
Sure, I will definitely take that forward as well. I do think that when we went to the hybrid meeting format for council, we knew that we wanted to ensure that the technology was working appropriately. And I think the last several council meetings have been successful. So good, that's great to hear. So I think that now that we've crossed that hurdle, we'll be able to start focusing on other CCBs as well.
Well, the other thing is it's different people, so it's not always the same person. So you have a lot of people at City Hall that can actually do that position with ease. So it's been great.
Great, thank you for that input. And I think, Chair, with that concludes the planning manager's report.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Triple. That was a really good and thorough planning manager's report. We'll now invite other planning commissioners to provide any other comments they may have. Commissioner Rackison?
Just a quick comment, and Dylan, you could stop me if I'm going off course here. You may recall we reviewed a LabCon project on February 14th of this year, and in work at that meeting, it was a great project. There were some folks who showed up with concern about impact as a citizen group that worked in the area, and at the time, I had just kind of asked the applicant, would you be willing to work with this citizen group kind of outside of this so we can get the project moving and then address public concerns kind of as good neighbors. And I'll say that they were very receptive to that. I think in my classic fashion, I kind of ran from the start line without kind of crossing my T's and dotting my I's. So this may end up being more of a handoff to the city. And this is the Casa Grande Anglers Association and maybe other citizen stakeholder groups. But I thought, once we kind of figure this out, it could be a good model as planning looks at great projects where there's still kind of maybe not even needing overriding consideration, but concerns, environmental impacts that need to be addressed. It could be great to have this ability to informally involve citizen groups and kind of put them to work right away, working with the applicant, if they're open to it, to kind of address those concerns moving forward so we don't stop good projects sometimes for things that can be worked out. And I also wanted to add to the tree committee report that there is an Arbor Day planting this coming Saturday at McNair Park from 10 to 12.
Nice.
So if folks want to come out and plant some trees with the tree committee,
Thank you.
we'd love to
Very
have
good.
everyone there.
Thank you. Any more commissioner comments? No? Well, with that, we'll go ahead and adjourn tonight's meeting at 8:51 PM. Thank you very much, everybody. Good meeting.
Great. Thank you, everyone.